But I think for vets is, look for the resources, I guess, would be the one. And I maybe challenge the status quo, because with PCV2, we tend to think in a certain way, and we are not really open to thinking in other ways. And I know the data might turn out that there is no effect, or there is no way to predict the production impact through those CT values in other fluids. But at least we know the answer, right? And we failed, and we know now that we don't have to use that type of tool. So maybe reach out to resources would be uh, and leverage the resources would be for them, and challenge the status quo. As a vet, I think, as a producer too, that's what I do every day. I challenge the status quo, especially in nutrition.
Welcome, everybody, to today's episode of the Swine Canada podcast. I'm Dan Columbus, and I will be your host for today's episode. And with me today, I have Dr. Fabian Chamba, who is currently operating a pig facility, but has done some work in the past with epidemiology and swine diseases, which we'll get into. So welcome, Fabian, and thank you for joining us today.
Hi, Daniel. Thank you for inviting me to be part of the podcast. It's really an honor to be here. And as you said before, these days I have the opportunity to be a producer, which is, for me, it's been a great experience to breathe, to live every day what they live every day. So we, in the swine industry, all the professionals, we have a common goal, which is to help producers do better, right? But when you are in their shoes, it's a completely different perspective. So I love it. And a little bit of my background, if you allow me. I'm from Ecuador. I got my veterinary degree from Ecuador. Currently, I'm validating my license here in Canada. And did my PhD in University of Minnesota. Worked for pharma companies pretty much my whole career. I have worked for pharma companies in Ecuador. I work in the US and also in Canada. In fact, I just accepted a position with HIPRA, a vaccine company, which is a multinational company. It's a big company. And in Canada, they have a huge presence. And they are introducing actually an innovative product for PCV2, which is one of the topics that we'll be covering today.
Working with nature and not against it, piglets fed AX3 see significant and improved feed efficiency. Producers know the reality of needing to reduce antibiotic and zinc use. AX3 Digest is a highly digestible novel protein that promotes improved in-barn performance, piglet health, and minimizes the need for zinc in the diet. For more information, visit www.protecta.com. That's www.protecta.com.
No, it's interesting background and experience that you have, and you did mention it, right? It's nice to be out there and living what a lot of us talk about, because I think, especially in academia, we get stuck in the ivory tower, right? And we don't always have that opportunity to go out there and see what it's actually like and what impact things are having. So, good experience for you, but I think we'll be glad to have you back on the in the vaccine and the research side of it and everything. So, so thank you again for joining us. And you kind of mentioned it briefly, but today's topic, I think, will largely be around diseases, and you've mentioned specifically, the epidemiology and surveillance of some diseases. So, I guess I'll just let you, start with that topic and maybe discuss, some of the stuff that you've done and some of the things that are coming up in that.
Yeah, sure. I try to be, short and sweet, and I try to cover topics that I think are relevant of what we do every day in any of the areas that we cover as pig production, right? Really, these concepts of how we can improve the overall science and research, and how we use research to help producers, I think is a whole thing. And you can call it, this is something that is a passion for me. So it started when I was in Ecuador, and I did some research in there, and then in Minnesota, it was really learn those tools as an epidemiologist. In fact, I remember it was funny because my classes of epi and biostatistics were in the School of Public Health, and there, it's full human things. But for me, it was more like, okay, I need to learn all of these things, and when I need it as a tool, it's not a problem because it can be applied to anything. I mean, pigs, poultry, cattle, cars, whatever. So for me, it was great to have the opportunity to take all of these advanced tools as an epidemiologist because it was really advanced. I mean, I covered so many grades and classes, like doing like probably a PhD in epidemiology more than my own PhD. But it's great because now when you talk about things like if I want to test a, a product in a farm, let's say an X vaccine, for example, how can I use the proper method to make at the same time to be cheap and also to at the same time to use that money because those exercises are expensive. So to use well the money, so I have the answers that I need to make a decision to do better for a producer or to lower my cost or improve my profit at a farm level, right? It can be a farm or it can be at a system level. So for me, getting this passion on how we can design these things better and how we can use the information that is available right now to do better, that's what I've been doing the last few years in Minnesota. I did a lot of influenza stuff, and all of my studies were on real farms. And a lot of the problems and the questions were, okay, man, how we do this in a real farm? You have 15, 20 people working in a 2,000, 3,000 head sow barn. How you make sure that the things that you do for the research project that you're conducting are actually closer to reality more than the research conditions that we have in a university. And we tend to think like so a lot of those things we have to do it in a control base. But when we think about control is more like you have control over the things that you measure versus the things that you actually have in the actual facility, right? So we think about control is a clean, very nice facility where you have 10 pigs, 15, 20 pigs, which is not really similar, right? There is a lot of good things under control studies that we need to do, like transmission studies and challenge studies, especially with pathogens that we don't want to mess up in the field. But on the other side, there are other type of studies that I think we can accommodate them in real farms. And I think the big companies in the US, for example, they already devoted a lot of resources and people to form teams and have farms dedicated to research and understand this type of thing, right? So they know how to do, let's call it field research and answer these questions better. So design is one of the things, right? So when you say control, is your understanding on which variables are important that can influence your outcome, and then you're good to go. You can do it in any farm, really. So you don't need an experimental farm to do these studies, right? And there's just more on the understanding on the design, and then from the design to the next step is how you make sense of that, on how you execute it, right? So for that's where you need to decide. For example, if you're doing let's say a farrowing rate trial, then you need to kind of split each of the weekly groups and consider who is breeding, the seeming, blah, blah, all of those factors that you think they are important, or you have information that they will impact your outcome. And then the other part is, so part of your design, the execution, it has to be very simple. In the barn, it has to be very simple. I have many mistakes in which I make things too complicated. They don't understand me, and then I fail because it has to be plain and simple. There is no other way that can happen. And yeah, so that's one thing. So simplicity, pragmatism. So few variables that are important. Don't get crazy, right? And then make sure that you have a control always, right? Sometimes your controls can be downsized in the sample size. That's an advantage, right? Because maybe you want to compare vaccine A versus B, but you want to make sure there is a challenge in the flow too at the same time. So then maybe instead of having 100 pigs in each of the group, maybe you can have 50 in the control and 100 in the other groups. and then you're good to go with that. So things like that are really practical and allows you to make it simpler and apply it and cheaper too. And then the other factor to consider, and I work a lot on this one, is to make things simpler and cheaper, focus on what's important, right? My question is about vaccine efficacy, for example, a PCV2 vaccine. Then for me, it's really simple and easy to say mortality is my goal, right? If I focus just on that one thing, and that's it. Don't worry about waiting pigs, and if mortality is where the money is, right? Really, then you don't need to spend more time in other things. So it's way simpler than you think. So after you pass that phase, when you make sure that you review information, your design is simple, your implementation is going to be simple, and it's also the cost is in consideration. Then the statistical analysis is also part of that, right? So there is no way that you can just do your design without thinking how you're going to analyze the data and how you're going to use it to make a decision or to solve a problem in the farm. So for me, like when I'm thinking on designing a study, like think about the final goal, which is how I'm going to implement this to make money in the farm. If the vaccine, for a PRRS vaccine, for example, if mortality is the goal, right? So think how you're going to apply it at the end in the real life so you can actually make it work. And then you design your study based on that. So I think and those things, and I'm not the first one mentioning those things. I think other people in the US related with field research, they are talking about the same, which for me, is nice because I think the academia and the industry has that opportunity because both sides can bring that, strengths and making it happen. So it's just like in my real life, I have to be, wiggling around between academia and industry. And now as a producer to them, I got a chance to see all the sides. So for me, it's like, okay, the end goal in mind, I think is where you need to start.
Yeah. No, it's interesting that you're living this all the time and trying to figure out how to do and work with industry and work on those farms and stuff like that. I think it's interesting. It's one thing to say make it simple and focus on certain things, but what's simple in an academic's head might not be simple to the producers and the workers that are doing it. And you mentioned that you had made some mistakes in the past. I'm just wondering, like, what are some of the lessons that you learned or things that you thought would have worked, but when it went out there, they're like, okay, this isn't working, or we can't do that or something like that.
Yeah, well, we have without a commercial name, but we have one trial, a reproductive one. So I think the sow farm was this was last year. The sow farm was in somewhere in Canada, and and the goal was to try this hormone or it's a hormone to synchronize ovulation. So the idea with that, at least in my mind, when I was working with my team in Southwest Vets, and at the time that I was there, I was working in research. So the question was from the owner of the product was, if this product is going to improve fertility or conception rate. So in our mind, we're like, okay, I think we reviewing your information and seeing what you have so far. So we think like there might be an opportunity here. So we might be able to improve 2 or 3% in fertility. So we design a protocol. And bear in mind, when you work with these things around insemination, it is complicated because there's always a lot of things going on in the sow barn, and then you have to make sure that this thing is going to be implemented, which is an additional thing. So the way that we decided in the paper, this product has to be applied, if I remember right, before on day 4. So on day 4, and then you synchronize those sows to be inseminated just once, fixed time insemination on day 5. So 24 hours before you need to apply the hormone to synchronize the ovulation, and then you inseminate a fixed time the next day. So it has to be applied that way. The problem with that is if you don't explain them well what to do with the 1 or 2 versus 2 doses of insemination, then they will screw up initially. So what we did is just tell them what to do, but already this design was already complicated because the weekly group that you win, I don't know, let's say 100 sows. You have to split them by parity. So say my P1s has to be half and a half for each of the group. Control is my normal, regular heat check and 2 doses of insemination after that. And in the other group was you just need on day 4, you need to apply the product, not inseminate. And then on day 5, inseminate all of them. So you apply the product to all of the sows, regardless of heat. If they show signs of heat, doesn't matter. You need to apply the product and inseminate just one time the next day. That's how we explain it. So we thought they got it, but man, when we review the data, so they they put the product, they inseminate at that day, and they inseminate again the next day. So it was. Then I realized that this is so confusing for them. And then we added another piece of confusion because the sows that come into heat on day 6, they need to be bred as regular sows. So don't use the product on day 5 and inseminate it just once on day 6. It's like it was like it was all over the place. So they were just they didn't know what to do. So what they did is okay. So we are confused. So we're going to use the product on day 4 as you told us, but we're going to keep inseminating with 2 doses just in case. So I don't blame them. I mean, I was being part of the team that I designed that, and after we realized that this is so confusing for them. This is why we screwed up.
Yeah, it's we even see that in a research facility where something you think is obvious in the protocol or is common sense or whatever, and then it gets out there and no, they're not getting it. But I think it's funny, that you say, well, we're going to do it just in case. It's like, but that's not the point of the research. The research is to test whether this works, right? Not the just in case. So all kinds of challenges, but that's not just applied research. I'd say that's everything. Maybe more so in the applied because you're dealing with people that are, they have a set thing that they do every day, and this is the procedure that they use, and they're so used to that. But and trying to get them to change they're a little hesitant, I think.
Yeah, and the other part was like I don't want to get blamed because fertility rate, conception rate is going to be lower because of that. Because you are telling me to inseminate sows that are not in heat. How can I trust it?
Yeah. Is there a strategy to deal with that? I mean, you're working with a facility that has obviously agreed to participate in research and stuff like that. But is there a strategy to get them to understand that what you're doing might not work or might result in reduced performance, or something like that, and like to get them to understand that and accept that, or is that just they're not willing to accept that it might not work?
Yeah, I think it will depend on the producer, right? Some people have that a different mindset, so they will be okay with any outcome that is not stated. But with other producers, it will be different, right? So then we at the time that I was working with Southwest in the clinic, we need to take a different strategies on insurance contracts or policies. So if something goes wrong, then the cost of the producer is covered or the losses. And so we're not used to do that with every single trial, but depending on the producer, I think that is covered. And there is always an estimate also for the producer for the time of the people spent or the producer energy and time and resources. Yeah. Something that I learned also from those, being on there is like, you need to be there the first 3-4 times that it's going to be done. Because if you think like you train them and then they will do it at the first time, and it's not going to happen. So something that I learned, like, you need to be there, work with them, so they will see it, they will, feel it and experience it, and the second time you will do it, so questions will might arise, and then you build also that connection and that confidence with the people too.
All kinds of challenges, but it's nice to see that you're working through them and making it work. Hopefully the rest of us will have to go to you for assistance if we're going to go out and do more of this work and make sure that it actually happens and happens well. I guess switching gears a little bit, you mentioned it previously with the PCV and some of the research that you've been doing, and I know this is a topic you wanted to talk about specifically with PCV2 surveillance and monitoring and stuff like that. So I guess what's been going on there? What are the trends, and what do you see happening?
Yeah, so PCV2 is a really interesting pathogen. As you know, when PCV2 hit North America and Europe, and I was just starting vet school, so I had no idea what's going on with PCV2. But after you learn from the people that is before you and all of the experiences that they face with that virus without a vaccine, I mean, it's just devastating. The vaccines, it is probably the only vaccine that has been the most successful vaccine so far for a pathogen in pigs. It is unbelievable efficacious. And that's, and you can see it. After they introduce the vaccine, you see the drop in mortality and losses. It was incredible. However, when you look at the reports from veterinarians in North America, especially, in the last few years, it seems like they are seeing more clinical cases. Although it's not like, not those cases that they used to see 20 years ago or a little less than that. It's more like a little more subtle cases, right? Or when the cases are presented with other pathogens like PRRS, you see like it tend to be worse. So they reported that something is either the virus has changed and the vaccine efficacy has changed. We don't know really with certainty, but it's really clear if you start thinking about how you can do a surveillance or a monitoring program that allows you to understand a little bit how the pathogen flows, at least from the sow barn through the finishers. I think we had some insights when I was in Southwest. We started that project actually, and I'm proud of that project because it was a way to join efforts from all the pharma companies that sells a PCV2 vaccine, which are 4 or 5, the names. So we rally them and tell them, what, I think we have a proposal that can allow us to understand better this pathogen and start seeing if vaccinating sows maybe is going to help to reduce the circulation of this pathogen. So that's how we started. So for starting with this idea, we have to also think about how we make this simple, because we cannot say we're going to choose an X number of flows, and then every month you need to send me 30 serum samples. That will be crazy. They will do it probably once, maybe twice, and the third time they'll say, okay, yeah, that's probably too much. It's not PRRS, and it's PCV2. You just vaccinate, and you're okay. So we review the literature, everything that has been published so far. We did some internal testing in the clinic to understand a little bit more how we can use oral fluids in a little more efficacious way. And we came up with all of this information, resulted in this idea of we can actually collect from the nurseries and the finishers. We can actually collect three drops, 3 oral fluids, pull them by 3. So the 3 you take 1 ml, 1 ml, 1 ml, and put it in a tube, mix it, and then send it for a PCR, and make it way cheaper. So 3 drops, one PCR per month is way cheaper than 30 zero samples tested individually. So that's one thing. The other thing that the experts were telling us at that time when we were proposing this is like you are testing what is in the environment, right? In other fluids, pretty much, not what is in the serum or the pig. But that was, the pushback, and it makes sense. So when we review the information, we realized that some people had this question of how viremia or the percentage of viremic pigs can correlate with the amount or the CT value that you can detect in your PCRs in feces or in oral fluids. And for my surprise, the correlation was moderate, decent. So for me, we're like, bingo, this is the opportunity that we needed, right? So now we can use this CT value from that PCR from the oral fluids as a proxy of the amount of hits or the quantity of the virus that is being shed in the environment. Because the amount of virus that is being shed in the environment is that direct correlation on how many pigs are shedding or viremic, right? Because for PCV2, they tend to shed when they are viremic most of the time, right? So that was great to see, because that was a big push, right? They were telling us, thinking with a clinical mindset, yes, you need clinical signs, you need your lesions, you need to find the pathogen in the lesions, your immunohistochemistry, and also you need your PCRs or the other data, right? So you need all of those three things to be able to say, yes, PCV2 is the cause of this disease. But we were coming from a population-based perspective in which we were saying, we know that PCV2 is there, but we want to kind of correlate if this level detected a CT values. So we were saying, okay, so we are coming from, we understand when you have a clinical case, this is what you need to do, right? But what if PCV2 is always there and the subtle effect is more subclinical? Maybe your increased mortality is 0.5%, maybe, right? And we don't, really consider that, but 0.5%, depending on the size of the group or the flow, that's a lot of money already. Each pig is worth $300 or something like that. So then, for me, that was an opportunity to understand on a flow level. So that was on the nursery and the finisher. Now, how you connect the dots with the sovereign. So in the sovereign, again, we have tons of information, a lot of expertise, feedback that we have from them, and a lot of experience already from big systems in the US. And although we were not thinking in using other fluids in the south, we were thinking more on what is the easiest and cheapest in the barns that are surgically castrating pigs or processing fluids. So we were like, yeah, that is the one. So, and we reviewed information, and you can pull hundreds of liters, up to 300, and then the dilution effect or the sensitivity won't be that bad. Of course, it will depend on your actually prevalence, right? For example, if you have just one positive out of 300 liters, of course, your pool is going to be negative, right? So there is a limitation on depending on how many liters would be positive versus how much you can really detect in your pool. But it's a way at a population base, again, on the flow level, a cheaper and an effective way to monitor PCV2 over time. And we were proposing to do it just on a monthly basis, not on a weekly basis. And some vets in the US, they do it weekly. And just one PCR is not crazy expensive either. So processing fluids in the sow barn every month. So we try to keep the same cohort or the same group, follow them with oral fluids just 1 or 2 weeks after weaning, because our thought process from that was like, we need to give the chance to the maternal immunity wane a little bit, and also to give the chance to shed and mix and share the pathogens, so then you might be able to detect it. So 1 or 2 weeks after weaning, and then 1 week before they are moved to the finishing. That's another sampling, and then a third sampling 1 or 2 weeks after they are moved into the finishing. That's how we place the samplings, and it turns out to be really, really useful. We obtain every single flow will have a different dynamic. That was really, really interesting to see, because we tend to assume like, you don't see clinical signs, then you don't have PCV2. Well, yeah, that can be in some of the flows. In some other flows, you might have a little bit higher mortality, and then you see the CT value from those testing, and you see like around 20s in the finishing. Or even in some flows, you will see CT values around lower 20s in the nursery. So then you scratch your head and say, well, what else is in there, or what's going on here? And then in the sow barn, the same. Sometimes the dynamic is a little different. Sometimes in the sow barn, you can detect really high quantities of PCV2 in those processing fluids. And then you detected it once at the beginning of the nursery, and then it kind of wanes down. It's like the peak is kind of develop the immunity, and the infection just resolves over time. Some flows are beautiful. Some flows are like flat out negative, negative, 40, 40, 40, 40, 40, 40, 40. You don't see it, not in the finishes, not in the sour. Every single flow will have a different dynamic, and I think that's what we usually forget when we monitor over time.
So does this change the thought about the effectiveness of the PCV2 vaccine, or I guess the success? Like maybe it wasn't as as successful as we thought. It was just kind of hiding, or what? If I'm understanding right.
No, I think it's first of all, for veterinarians, I think it's a tool. So now you can actually understand what's going on in there, and then you match that information with what you see right in the flow, and then your production data. You see how many barbecues do you have, what is your mortality. In fact, we collected production information from those flows, from the group that we collected information, and we ran correlations to make it simpler. Regression to associate those two things, right? And see if that CT value level detected in those groups can be associated with the level of mortality. Just from the preliminary data that we obtained until I was in Southwest, we saw that when they have more circulation or lower CT values over time in those flows, they tend to have a little higher mortality, maybe 0.5% higher mortality than compared to the other ones. So then, that information helps you to kind of start asking the next question about the vaccines, and they say, okay, those pigs are vaccinated with 1 dose, maybe 2 doses with this A, B, or C vaccine. Is that because the vaccine is not working, or what is happening there? And that's one of the other questions that we have, right? So we need to understand what to do about this. And exactly what we think is happening in there is the sows pass the virus to the fetuses. We know that vertical transmission. And then from there, pigs are born either with infected or not infected. And then that's how you kind of develop the infection over time. If there is a lot of that transmission, then you will have a lot of the PCV2 early on. So if you have those situations, then you cannot really blame the vaccine because the pigs are already infected, right? By the time you're vaccinating the pig. So we need to keep that in mind. So I think it's not a tool to compare vaccine efficacy. It's more to understand how the pathogen flows and what will be the impact of that circulation in your production, in your mortality, or in your culls or barbecue pigs.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I guess the obvious question is, based on this information, then what would be the next steps? Like, do we have to adjust protocols? Do we have to look at something else? So I guess what's the end goal of this?
Yep, the end goal is precisely to use this to adjust your vaccination protocols. As I told you, it's more as a holistic view to adjust your protocol, not to compare vaccines. So then, in my barn, actually, what we did is, and this another producer might be doing the same right now, using this information, is if I see that I have circulation, in my case, in my barn, I saw in processing fluids, it was kind of intermittent. I can see the CT value going from 40 to 30 something, and then 40, like kind of doing like this. For me, we're like, this might be a sign of instability, although the levels weren't that high. But for me, we're like, I need to kind of stabilize this and make sure that I push or I don't have any early infection with PCV2. So we start vaccinating sows. I think it was at Winnie. And then we check the data a few months later. To my surprise, I didn't, and this is just my single flow, and this is not with other, but with other flows, now I remember, mummies, that is the indicator that we use to see the impact of this change in the protocol of vaccination in the sows. To my surprise, there was a reduction in the percentage of mummies after we start vaccinating sows. And now, the causes of mummies, you're saying PCV2 is not the only cause of mummies. Yes, you're right. There are other pathogens and even management things that can impact that. But if you keep doing the same and just change this one thing, for us, but like at least 0.5% of mummies was due to a PCV2 vaccination in South. So that was one thing. The other thing is like I stopped seeing these kind of changes that I was seeing, like the instability, if you want to call it that way. And now it's flat out. Everything is negative 40. And I don't see PCV2. Sometimes I see PCV2 in the finisher, but that's all what I see. Everything is negative after that. It's flat out negative. CT values are 40. That was one. The other thing that I'm not trying to convince myself with this one because it's a little more difficult to associate mortality with the CT values or the effect of the sow vaccination on those CT values and try to say like there is a direct effect on that. However, our nursery mortality is a little lower than before. And there is seasonality and there is other causes around that, but to me it feels like it helps to kind of, especially those little pigs, the ones that are going to struggle after winning. I think I will help them a little bit to fight that infection. But that's not that's anecdotal. We were collecting data and we saw about 0.5% reduction overall when we include about 15 flows with the nursery data, the mortality data associated with those CT values in the other fluids. And we found like about 0.5% can be associated, like the lower the CT value, the higher the mortality. That's the association that we saw. But I think the effect is small. I don't think you can say like, oh, I'm going to lower my mortality from 4 to 2% just vaccinating sows for PCV2. That's not going to happen.
Well, I think we definitely will look forward to more information that comes out of your surveillance and potential adjustments to protocols and how to deal with that. I think especially now producers need all the help they can get, right, to get as many pigs out the door and have them be healthy. Definitely some interesting work. So we're getting close to the end of the time. So I guess I'll ask you, if you want the listeners to get, one or two take-home messages from today's episode, what would that be?
For producers, I guess to look for help with veterinarians and researchers and try to integrate. There is always teamwork is always a good thing, right? So a lot of experiences from other people that can help you. Try to go and see other producers and visit and open your eyes to the things that are happening in other places. That will be for a producer. For vets, I guess for vets, I know they are busy. It's really difficult for a vet to put hours after night, time that you should spend with your family, that you put it in reading or understanding something that you're not aware of. But I think for vets is, look for the resources, I guess, would be the one. And I maybe challenge the status quo, because with PCV2, we tend to think in a certain way, and we are not really open to thinking in other ways. And I know the data might turn out that there is no effect or there is no way to predict the production impact through those CT values in other fluids. But at least we know the answer, right? And we failed, and we know now that we don't have to use that type of tool. So maybe reach out to resources would be and leverage the resources would be for them and challenge the status quo. As a vet, I think, as a producer too, that's what I do every day. I challenge the status quo, especially in nutrition. We do things that based on the information that is published. When you collect all the information and then make sense of it and read it, like, it's not what you think. Maybe you can actually improve your profit or reduce your feed costs doing something that is a little simpler and challenge the status quo, but be informed. Work with the experts and review the information.
I definitely like anybody who says that the message is to challenge the status quo, because I think that's the only way that we advance and get better and improve, right? So I think a very, very good message.
It's time for our famous 3.
So we've come to the point of the podcast where we ask the guests the same three questions, a little bit more, I guess, somewhat unrelated to the rest of the topic, but get a little bit more information out of you and maybe some suggestions for reading. So our first question that we ask is your favorite swine or animal or agricultural related resource, like that you always go to. It's your
The Bible.
your Bible, yes.
I tell it the Bible because diseases of swine for me has been a result since I was practicing in Ecuador as a vet here. I I use it all the time, and I joke with my wife because when she comes, she's a vet too, and when she comes to me with questions about certain pathogen or disease, I told her, well, look in the Bible. It should be there.
So, okay. So our next one, getting a little bit outside again, like I said, of the animal science, is what would be your favorite book or resource outside of your work or animal science? So, this one's wide open. You can say anything.
Yeah, no, well, when I have time to read, I read Simon Sinek, especially, he's got one book that stick in my mind, which is Why Leaders Eat Last. And I think that one is a good lesson for us on thinking on how to understand people in the bands and people everywhere from where they are coming, right? Especially. So to understand that and to understand how leadership really should be is mind blowing for me because of my previous experiences so far. And yeah, that's what what I like to read when I have time, because I normally don't have much time to read.
None of us do, but it's always good to get away from the actual stuff once in a while. So our final question is, when you think back to swine professionals or even like general leaders or whatever, what would be a characteristic that you would say sets the successful ones apart from those that are, maybe a little bit less successful?
Yeah, without names, what I've seen, especially when I was in the US, something that see as a trait for them was that they really leverage resources. And don't take me wrong, they are smart people, hard working people. They challenge the status quo. They have all of the other traits that normally we consider good for being successful in an industry, but or as a professional. But something that I realized that this, being resourcefulness, being connected and look for the expertise and leveraging that, I think is a key one for me.
Yeah, no, I would agree in that. That's a different one. Haven't heard that one yet, but it's definitely an important one, right? Is you use what's around you. That's what my kind of teaching philosophy kind of revolves around that too, right? Where it's like, you're not going to be the expert, and you need to find out who those people are and know who to go to and where to go for help. So I think it's definitely, an important trait. So, well, I think that brings us to the end. I have no more questions for you for this one. So I'll thank you again for being on, and some great information. And I hope you enjoyed your time with the podcast, and hope to have you on sometime again in the future.
Well, thank you, Daniel. It's really an honor. I'm sorry, and I'm in Ecuador, and the conditions are not the best ones.
I don't think the audience is going to be sorry that you're in Ecuador. I mean, it's generally one of those places that I think a lot of people would like to at least visit. So, but it all seemed to work out well.
Yeah, to be on the beach is kind of the place to go.
Yeah, I would never say no to that. But so yeah, thanks again, and thanks to everyone for listening.